We are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us. Nick Barris along with attorney David Raybin. We're talking about truth in sentencing, a law that was just passed by the legislature, will be taking effect soon. You get sentenced to 10 years, you do 10 years. And many of you will say, that's your sentence, you go. That, according to David Raybin, puts us on a path to financial and correctional department disaster for a lot of reasons. It's history repeating itself. Here's my question. Was this put together in your mind? First of all, you, someone who was involved in 79 with writing almost the exact type of law that then they realized wasn't going to work. Were you consulted? Did any of the stakeholders? I didn't ask Sheriff Darren Hall last time he was on if he was involved. Did these lawmakers consult with the folks who were going to be affected by this?
No. I begged to participate in this. And they said, okay, you can come to Judiciary Committee and speak. They gave me 3 minutes to talk. Asked no questions. I submitted papers. They obviously hadn't read any of this. They consulted, to my knowledge, with no one but themselves. There are whole groups of people in Tennessee who would gladly give you input into what makes sense of this. Many rehabilitative organizations. There's church groups. There's a group called Right on Crime, a very conservative group, but they believe in having a measured response to these things. To my knowledge, none of these people were consulted. They basically said, we're going to have 20 crimes. It'll be like this, and by the way, we'll add another 4 or 5. So every time it would go to committee, they'd add more and more offenses to the list.
I suppose I should know this. Maybe you do then. Maybe there was. Maybe it's just the lawmakers on their own. Was there a lobbying organization, to your knowledge, that was pushing this? I mean, you could argue maybe those who build prisons like this idea because it's going to create more work for them. Maybe any lobby for it?
No. That was the strange thing. There was no lobby like you would think that Corrections Corporation would say, oh, you know, they're secretly trying to get all this. That's not so. I mean, I'm certainly no fan of the private prisons, I can assure you of that. But I'm sure they were not unhappy about this, but they were not out there prompting this. I'm not aware of any group that was carrying signs and running around in the halls saying, we need this law. There just wasn't any. This came from the legislatures. It came from Speaker Sexton. There's some speculation that some constituent or friend or someone may have been hurt by a parolee or something like this. But they just went from passing one of these every year to passing dozens of these all of a sudden with no consultation. The media was looking at this. Your station did a story about it, and the Tennesseans did a story. But I think the consensus was, oh, this is more, you know, political stuff. That's not really going to happen. But it did. And now here we are. And the governor said, I'm not going to sign this, but he didn't veto it. And he sent a message. His message was, I think the governor read what I wrote. He said, we've been there before. Other governors have tried this. It didn't work. Other states have. It didn't work. And sent a message, and they sent a message back. They said, well, this is what we want. If we need more prisons, we'll just build more prisons. That was outrageous. You know, the constituents are not consulted about the fiscal side of this. I think we should be smart on crime. We should have a crime commission. We work with the district attorneys, work with the prisons. I mean, the former, Tony Parker, the former commissioner of correction, wrote an article saying we can't have a law like this. I mean, he's the commissioner of correction saying we can't have a law like this. Everybody who's ever worked, anybody who's ever been in a prison, these legislators, I don't think any of them have toured the prisons. A couple of them are in danger of going over there in federal court, but I don't think they've ever been there. And then it's just, this is not the way to run a correctional system. The budget, it's a huge part of our budget. When we don't build schools this way, Nick.
Right.
We don't build bridges this way. We don't build infrastructure this way. We depend on our legislature, our governors and leaders to show some restraint and to cherry pick those crimes and those criminals that need the life sentences, that need to be locked up forever. I was a prosecutor for a long time. It's easy to pick out those people who are criminals so far gone with so long a record that they need to be locked up forever. And that's fine. But not everybody needs to be dumped into that pot.
Our phones had been down leading up. Typically, we get a lot of calls, especially on a subject like this, but the line just got up. And so we're going to take some phone calls if we can. We've got the number. We'll put it back up if you have a thought on this. Let's go to Jeff real quick before we take a next break on line 1. Jeff, are you there? Is the phone working?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, sir.
My suggestion was, I remember back in the 70s and the 80s, they used to have state-run farms by the penitentiary. I don't see why they don't do that for less violent offenders.
Oh, so other options besides prisons?
Well, he's talking about penal farms,
Probably,
that sort of thing. They closed all of those. This gentleman is exactly correct. We had a work release center where they would come. Governor Lee's, some of the people that work for the Lee Air Conditioning are former prisoners. There are several prison employers in Nashville where they would have a bus. They'd pick the prisoners up, they'd go to work, then they'd bring them back. It was a tremendously successful program. And then when they would be paroled, they'd go to work for these same people. So this gentleman is exactly correct. Those were good programs, but they closed all that.
They just stopped. That
They
was
just
it.
stopped.
Yeah. You know, I mean, okay, so would you say there was not a hue and cry for this to be passed, and who knows exactly what got it going, but I understand probably politics is behind an awful lot of it. The system, the way it's working as it is now, though, would you agree then, it obviously wasn't perfect. Does it need to be adjusted? Could they have done something more to maybe improve truth in sentencing without going to the length that they did?
Well, you know, the word, I don't understand this whole thing of truth in sentencing. That makes, that can mean anything to anybody.
Well, no, the people, when they watch and we talk about it, okay, he was sentenced to 15 years, and then the story comes out, well, such and such got out after 6. And people are like, wait a second, because that's what they hear. And the norm, and I didn't know this until, of course, I'm in the news business and cover trials. I eventually realized from talking to people like you and the like that when you get 20 years, that doesn't mean you're doing all 20 years. It's usually 30% you're eligible for parole if you behave behind bars. The average public viewer and citizen does not understand that, in my opinion.
I think people want to know, they want to have certainty in sentencing.
So, but their truth is they think you're being untruthful when you say they're going to do, the judge just gave them a 20-year sentence, and then they find out, 5 years from now the person's getting out.
But the judge didn't give the person 20 years. If you look at the judgment that the judge renders, he said you've got 20 years, you'll be eligible for parole in 30%.
I know, but people just look at the 20. I'm just saying, that's the reality of it.
I understand that, but it has to start somewhere.
Okay.
In federal court, they have a thing and say you're going to do 7 years, and then we'll tack on 3 years behind it for supervision. They do it backwards. That's to me, that's just that's a bait and switch, where the judge says you've got 10 years, you're going to do 10 years. Everybody says great, and then I'll add 3 years of supervised release on top of it. Well, it's a 13-year sentence. You get out after 10. It's it's how you package it. We could do the same thing in Tennessee if we wanted to. In an afternoon, I could take a piece of paper and do exactly the same thing. Say, fine, you want truth in sentencing? Yeah. I'll give you 10 years, and then the judge can tack on however much more the judge wants.
We should get you to do that. Now,
it's simple.
I don't know. As far as you said earlier, other states, Tennessee's kind of going in the other direction to what the national norm is. Not that we should always follow the gang. Tennessee marches to its own beat of its own drummer. But what do we see other states doing when it comes to sentencing?
Okay. We border 8 other states.
Okay.
We have states all around us. We're not that big. Other states, and I'm not talking what they do in California, strange places like that. Yeah. But the states like Virginia, North Carolina, they have sentencing commissions and the like. And they did this. And now they're saying this doesn't work. It's too expensive. We're going to not decriminalize, but we're going to de-incarcerate some offenses. We'll shorten sentences. We'll keep this 100% or whatever, but we'll sentence a shorter amount of time. Or we'll give the discretion to the judge to cut the sentence in half, for example, if necessary. So there are all sorts of things that you can fine-tune this to keep you want people to be safe. You want to have a deterrent for people to committing crimes, and you want people to be incarcerated, which is what we decide. It's a terrible thing. I mean, for people to be incarcerated for eons, they lose their families, their children, they lose the way of keeping people supported. They're no longer paying taxes and the like. So that's okay for the extremely dangerous people, but we know who they are. We've long since learned that judges and the DAs and the police officers can tell us who those folks are.
Give me an example again. You gave a good one earlier about a kid stealing a TV. Just for the public at large, all the public would agree with you right there. You're a murderer and you get, second-degree murder, whatever, you're doing 25 years, you probably should have to do all that. You killed someone, took him away. But give me an example of some type of individual who may commit a crime and get a sentence now and realize, oh my gosh, I have to do that whole thing.
A perfect example, the school zone thing, where the person sells some dope, within 1,000 feet of a school, not to a child. Somebody sells dope to a child, put them under the penitentiary. I'm fine with that. But they sell dope to an undercover person at midnight in the summer where there's no school. If it's in 1,000 feet, you serve every day of the sentence, every day. And that law backed up hundreds and hundreds of people. The legislature just passed a law asking the judges to resentence all those people.
Now, how much time do they do typically when they get in a school zone?
100%.
I know, but what do they get? Like
six and eight, between 6 and 8 years.
Years for something like that.
Yes, and it was designed. People said, "Oh, we don't want people selling drugs to kids near a school." I agree with that, but it didn't. That wasn't the crime. It was just having the drug or selling the drug within a school zone, and the legislature itself said that's too harsh. Too many people are locked up for that, and it had a terribly disparate effect on racially in East Tennessee, particularly. The district attorney's office here in Nashville and some other DA's office said they weren't going to prosecute those, but you had hundreds of people locked up. The legislature itself went back and changed that law, and now those people are being resentenced. My son has had 2 of those that he just got resentenced to much less time. And the kid that steals the TV, the kid that steals a car or whatever. I mean, there are different kinds. It's like,
sure.
The stealing the loaf of bread kind of thing. We just don't punish everybody for everything. We make a distinction between them.
Which is why you have judges and, to do the nuance. And
exactly.
Let's take a call from Linda. Linda, good morning. Hi, Linda.
Good morning. I like the idea of the guy that had just a while ago said something about them, the penal farms and all. Mm-hmm. Most of the prisons have land around them, so why can't they have some of the more non-violent people out working and in a farm situation for vegetables and all, and they wouldn't have to pay as much to bring food into the prison system, and they can grow their own in a lot of cases. So I just thought that's a very good idea for them to have.
Well, a lot of those programs taken away. I know the Rutherford County Sheriff has I'm pretty sure still, a big garden outside the jail there, and they work that, and they produce food for themselves, which is great. But a lot of those programs went away, right?
Well, they do, and tomatoes don't grow in the winter.
Yeah, well, that's right, too. Of course, you can't do. Yeah, but I hear what she's saying. I mean, you're in favor of that kind of.
They do have that, but then you can't just, get the tomatoes and slice them up. And that sort of, you can, but you have to have other kinds of food. You have to process them and that sort of thing. The kind of thing I'm talking about are the work release programs, where local businesses would hire people who are in prison, and they would come into work. The state of Tennessee itself had prisoners who were on work release. Very successful programs, teaching people to do things. I had a client who was in for murder, and she worked she was an accountant, and she worked for the controller's office, and then in the evening she would go back to the penitentiary. So and then when she finally quit, then she ended up working for the state. So you do have people change. Of course. Some people are incorrigible. I get that. Maybe like the guy that escaped down there in Alabama or whatever, but they're not all like this. People do change. Particularly the younger people, and the terrible crimes that are committed. But we can do smarter things. on that.
Listen, we'll take a break, and when
Sure.
we come back, we're just going to do a quick shift of gears. You mentioned it, and David said he could talk about this because there's another very curious case similar that happened in Tennessee several years back. But we all know right now the nationwide search for the Alabama correctional officer and the accused murderer, who are both on the run. They had a romantic relationship. They escaped, and it's been 10 days, not a sign of them. Though you saw last Friday their SUV that they believed they drove away in was found in Williamson County. But they didn't get any leads on that. David said that's history repeating itself, too, to some degree, with another case that happened here in Tennessee. We'll talk about that and his thoughts about the current case right after this.